Hi, I'm Doug.
And I'm Kathy.
And today we want to take you on to the second part of the beginning of our RV adventures. If you haven't seen the first part yet, there will be a link at the end of the video to that video. Please go back and take a look at it. It'll tell you about how we got into RVing, our first RV, our Jayco Class C, and the first couple of trips we had. But this picks up the end of June of 2018 and goes to our first big road trip. It was 9 days on the road. We knew a couple of spots we wanted to go, but we didn't have everything all mapped out. We just kind of wanted to take the trip and see where the road took us, and it threw us a couple of curves along the way too that were really worthwhile.
Absolutely.
So the very first day we left early in the morning, as I remember, probably just as the sun was coming up, and we left our home in Leesburg, Florida, went up to Interstate 10 and across the Panhandle into Alabama, and then north, and ended up the first night in Tupelo, Mississippi. And if you guys are familiar with that area, you know that was a long drive. And we got in that evening. Now, we did have reservations, thank goodness, at that park, but it was a little park that we found, I think, on the RV Parky app, and had called about earlier in the day.
Yeah.
And it was called the Campground at Barnes Crossing in Tupelo, Mississippi. They had our paperwork there by the door for us. If I remember right, that was one of those two that they left an envelope that you put the money in for them and dropped it through the slot in the door. And we never got to see any of the people there. We arrived into the evening. It was still daylight, but into the evening, and we left first thing the next morning to get back on the road. But you talk about a beautiful park. That's definitely one that we would highly recommend and want to go back to. First time since I was growing up in Ohio that I'd seen fireflies, seen lightning bugs, and it was beautiful. It was a magical little park.
It was. They had well tended all of the area with flowers just everywhere. It was mowed down, so you didn't have a lot of weeds to go through. It set back a little bit off the road so that there was a little pastured area that we drove back, that it was setting behind, and it was quite lovely.
It was all, as I remember, all blacktop roads that goes up the hills, and they cross the hill and then come back down on the other side. And very well maintained, very nice park. We actually stayed going up the hill, going completely across and coming back down to the front corner. We stayed right on that corner, and it was all wooded around us and open on the one side, or open on our campsite, and it was a beautiful spot.
It was very peaceful.
That was probably my only downside to the entire trip we took, is of any place I wish we could have stayed at for a longer stay, that was the park I wish it had been, and that was just an overnight. So we left Tupelo, drove on through Arkansas, and ended up at our first destination, which is Branson, Missouri. And we stayed at a little place called Carson's Country Court.
It was a nice little place tucked in the middle of town. We were there more for visiting family than to be out. As you know, we didn't have our toad yet, so we weren't out exploring on our own. And they came over, picked us up, got to see family I hadn't seen for quite a number of years. And we went to places like the Landing and up and down Branson's main strip, drove out around Table Rock Lake. It was just a very enjoyable time. So we didn't really get to see that much, spend that much time in the park. It was a little bit under the trees, and they were tall old trees. I would call it like the city of Branson itself is very vintage. those trees in that park were also very vintage.
Yeah.
And there was a storm, which made us a little bit nervous.
The night we pulled in, we had just gotten hooked up, and the heavens opened, and rain and thunder and lightning and tornado warnings in the area. And so that first night was a little bit dicey, but we were over at our family's home and spent the evening there. And by the time we went home, it had stopped raining and storming and cleared up, and Motorhome was still in one piece, so the world was good.
It was quiet, I will say that. We were there 2 nights.
2 nights.
And I don't remember hearing much of anything going on around us, while there were still a lot of people, actually full-timers, I believe. It seemed like there were a lot of people that were actually staying there full-time. It was a nice, quiet place. It wasn't the resort that that you sometimes expect, but
especially in a place like Branson.
Yeah, but it was quaint. It was quiet.
We chose it because it was close to where the family lives. It was very inexpensive. At the time, it was $25 a night. I think out of all of it, it was all permanent except for a space of, I think, 5 sites that were transient, like what we were using. So it's not maybe as accessible sometimes, but again, we got right in. We didn't have any issue with that. And overall, for what we needed it for, it certainly served the purpose.
It absolutely did.
Well, after the 2-night stay in Branson, our next stop was to Kansas City, Missouri. We were there for the next 2 nights. And again, it was to visit with family, and family helped select this park for us also. This was Trailside RV Park in Kansas City, Missouri. And again, it's a smaller park. It was kind of unique in it was located near the interstate, but it also had an RV dealership directly beside it. So if you were in a situation where you needed something for your RV or needed service, you were close by to a dealership that way, which was kind of unique.
It had a good walking. My sister-in-law said she goes down there and walks out. I remember, was it a lake or something?
Yes,
it
right
had
across the street.
Big space to get a big walk in. She said she'd go down there a couple of times a week, if not more, and do her morning walk. And it, like you said, it was right by the interstate, so it headed right into the main part of the city. We actually ended up going over and seeing a fort. I don't remember the name of the fort, but it was just a very convenient spot to be able to pull into and visit family and go around for a quick little tour. We were only there for 2 nights.
Again, it was a nice, clean park. They had a big pool, big amenity area that way. And one thing that I remember so much with that park, there was a square dance convention going on in Kansas City that weekend. And our neighbors came out, and we were grilling and they were grilling and everybody talking and socializing, and pretty soon everybody kind of came up missing, and then you see everybody coming out in their square dance duds and all carpooling together and driving into the city. It was almost like being in another world, but it was a nice park, a nice stay there. Trailside RV Park, Kansas City, Missouri. Again, it was right along the interstate, so it was an easy in, easy out, but kind of secluded back there too. It was a nice, very small but very nice park. Now, so far it seems like we had our route pretty well planned out. We had the first night was kind of a layover. The next 2 were with family. The next 2 again were up near family in Kansas City. But we didn't know what the trip home was going to bring. And while we were on our way up there, I had a friend of mine post on Facebook a post about this place called Helen, Georgia. And Helen, Georgia, I'd never heard of. I don't think you had ever heard of it either.
I hadn't either.
And it's a little Bavarian community up in northeastern Georgia. And so somewhere along the way, either in Branson or between Branson and Kansas City, we said, why don't we at least swing through there on the way home. So when we left St. Louis, we started meandering east, and we ended up going through St. Louis, got to see the arch, at least from the road. That's a place I want to go back and go up. I don't know if you want to go up in it or not. But came down through Paducah, Kentucky, and ended up and stayed that night in Nashville. And we stayed at the Yogi Bear Nashville Resort, and it is out near the new Opry House, where Opryland used to be. And again, that was one that we got in probably in the later part of the afternoon. We were using our RV Parky app at that point. That was about the only resource that we knew of, and still is one that we use a good bit. But Kathy called a couple of them, and there was a couple that didn't have any vacancies, but this one did. And we got there, and security gate, they make sure that you are supposed to be there. They let you in the gate, you go in and check in. Again, they escort you to your site. It was a really nice park. They had a little Brothers Pizza there on site. Lots of activities for kids. If you're a traveling family, it would be an ideal spot. We were just there for the one night. There were tent campers. There were big Class A's, you name it, everything in between. Very, very big park, very well taken care of, and very, very dark. There is not a light on in that park at night. I went outside, and it's like you feel like you're in the middle of absolute nowhere. But again, it was a great spot to stay. With everything around Nashville, that's been on our list to get back to. We haven't yet, but we would definitely consider going back to that park on the next trip through. So at this point, we decide that, we're definitely on our way to Helen, Georgia, but we've got to find a place to stay. And we drove from Nashville down to the southern part of the state of Tennessee, and then across the northern part of Georgia. And it was mountainous. The roads were twisty.
It went along whatever that river was.
I don't know the name of the river, but
rapids. I never heard of rapids in Georgia, but there were people tubing and canoeing, and it wound its way around. There was a dam. It was beautiful. It was just really, really neat. A neat drive.
It was a great drive, and I would not recommend that drive to anybody because our GPS took us places that nobody should ever go. One took us off of the road, and there was a little wooden bridge in front of us with no side rails, no nothing, and it's like, that's never gonna hold us. A car pulled in behind us, and she says, "Are you lost?" And they ended up, they had a motorhome also. They knew that was not a bridge made for a motorhome, and they lived back there. So they went back and blocked the road for us so we could back out onto the road, and it still took us through some.
I think they gave us directions on how to get back over to the main highway too, but yeah, that when we saw that bridge, we looked at each other and going, okay, because it seemed like the rest turned into a dirt road or something going forward. So you either went across the bridge or went up in the dirt, and it was like, now what do we do?
But we did end up and get where we were going, and we found a place online, I believe probably RV Parky again, because that's the only thing we knew at that point. And it was called Horseshoe Trails, and it is a resort. We actually have one of those little picture frames. That's what we're staring off at. Yeah. One of those picture frames you load your pictures in, and we were just taking a look at our Jayco parked at that campground. It was one of the most beautiful mountainside campgrounds I've ever seen. If you check it out, they do charge you, I think it's $5 per person per day amenity fee, but they have horseback riding, they have canoeing. It's It's a phenomenal place, and a place I wish we could have stayed longer. We were only there one night.
One night, I think.
Yeah, just the one night. We got there, we stayed there, and then we left the next morning and actually drove the motorhome into Helen. But beautiful, beautiful campground.
We backed into the space, and it was on like a cliff, and so that your back of your motorhome was literally hanging off, and you're looking down at all these woods and trails. There was a trail that went alongside it that went down to a bathhouse, but it was beautiful. It really was.
It was, and as rustic as what it was very modern in the amenities. Where we parked the motorhome, it actually, the part that hung out, it had a wooden deck over on the side. The hookups were still easy to get to, even though they were kind of coming up towards the deck off the side of the hill. They were put where you could get to them. It was tight with the 26-foot Jayco making the turn to back up and get into the site. We couldn't have done it with anything bigger, but they do have areas there that you can get some larger coaches in. But absolutely beautiful. Again, if you're in that area, that's definitely one to put on your list, and that's another one that as long as we could get a bigger spot, we would go back.
Yeah.
Well, we went from there and we spent the day in Helen, and that was another whole experience. It was a great time there. Found a parking lot downtown. Again, no towed, so we had to take the motorhome in there. But we found a parking lot downtown that we could leave the motorhome, and spent the day in Helen. So after we spent the early part of the day and lunch and into the afternoon in Helen, we decided we were going to start heading back towards Florida. And beautiful drive down through Georgia. We ended up and got back onto the interstates down by Macon, and we stayed at Byron, Georgia, and it was called the Interstate RV Center and Campground. And they had, I don't know if they had been an RV dealership. It didn't look like they were actually selling RVs, but they did have a big store, parts, accessories, that sort of thing. And runs in my mind, they said they closed at 6, and we called back and forth a couple of times and said it's going to be like 6 to 10 after until we're there, according to the GPS. No problem, we'll wait on you, don't worry about it.
Very accommodating.
Yeah. And again, this is one of those parks, and I don't mean it in a bad way. There's not a lot to say about it. It was all pull-through sites. It wasn't anything fancy, but again, it was right along the interstate, and for what we needed for it to pull in, we set up, got the grill out, had a nice evening there in the park, packed everything back up, and we're on the road the next morning. We couldn't ask for a nicer, easier in and out, and very accommodating people. So probably not a place I want to go spend a week at, because there wasn't that much to do right around there, but for what we needed it for, couldn't have asked for a better spot. We left there that next morning and headed back to Florida, and like I said, it was either the 2nd or the 3rd of July we got home, and thought we'd have the holiday to rest that way on the 4th and back to work the next day. And I think that's when my gear started turning. About, that's the longest 9 days out. That's the longest I think I'd ever traveled, and I thought I could really get used to that.
Yeah, I think he started talking about full-time at that point. I hadn't really bought into the full-time yet, but I do remember we got in and settled back in, turned the TV on, looked at each other and said, where next?
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us. The next travel video you see from us is going to pick up from there. Made some changes coming up. Like I said earlier, we changed some furniture around in the Jayco. We added a toad to the household. We made some changes around the house to make things easier for the motorhome and the extra vehicle. And I kept bending her ear about going full-time eventually. So we thank you for joining us. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you know when the next travel video is out. And we look forward to seeing you then and joining us as we follow the moon. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and be sure to ring the notification bell so you'll know when we have new videos listed. Also, be sure to check out our blog at followthemoon.us and also our Facebook page at Follow the Moon and on Instagram at Follow the Moon Travel. Thanks.